So I'm Dan Cohen, I'm the COO of Mindgrub, and this is going to be the panel for EdTech startups. We've already talked a little bit about holistically building an EdTech ecosystem, and we talked a little bit about mobile learning as a platform. For this panel, we'll talk a little bit about the specific challenges that specific companies face, from building products, the unique challenges, and raising money and different sales cycles. So we're going to get a good discussion going on that. First, I'll start by introducing our panelists. First, we have Jess Brondo, who's the founder and CEO of the Edge in College Prep, and admittedly, two EdTech companies focused on test prep and college admissions based in New York. She founded the Edge in College Prep in 2005 and has since expanded to 5 international cities and has launched an innovative online SAT/ACT prep course, the SAT/ACT Edge. Through a strategic partnership, the SAT/ACT Edge will be distributed to over 100,000 students at over 1,000 high schools for the 2013-14 school year. Ryan Duques is a serial media and EdTech entrepreneur. At 18, he co-founded Shore Publishing, Connecticut's second largest newspaper publisher. The group started 14 and acquired 2 award-winning weekly newspapers. Duques is co-founder and managing partner of Apparos Education, which supports students across the world with live online instruction and tutoring through its website, TutorPoint and ByronAcademy.org. Next is Jordan Goldman, and frustrated by his own experiences with the college search process. As an 18-year-old, Jordan created the best-selling Student's Guide to Colleges series of college books, which were released in 5 annual editions from Penguin Books. After graduating, Jordan founded Unigo, which the Wall Street Journal's Walt Mossberg called a college resource built for the age of YouTube and video. And last but not least, Sarah Hall. Sarah first cut her teeth in the professional world on the floor of the UN General Assembly as a delegate for St. Vincent and the Grenadines, fighting for the rights of women, children, and other vulnerable populations. Always imbued with the spirit of an entrepreneur, Sarah decided it was time to strike out on her own and launched hybrid agency Harley&Co in the spring of 2012. Bridging the divide between the analytical and creative, Sarah assembled an elite team of strategists and creatives with backgrounds as diverse as her own to work with brands, governments, startups, and talent. All right, please welcome our panel. So I think this was touched on in a couple of different topics in the other panels, but let's start off with how important do you think it is to have a background in education specifically before starting an EdTech company yourself? Jess, do you want to start off?
Sure. So I absolutely think that it's invaluable to have a background in education if you're starting an education startup. I think that there are a lot of companies out there that think that they can solve a lot of education's issues without having the background. But one of the things that I've found is that unless you're talking to educators, or you have been an educator, or you've lived the problem, you're probably solving a tiny little minute portion of the problem instead of the actual problem and the pain point that educators have. So I think that 100% a background in education is really important, whether it's the founder or at least one member of the team.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say you have to, at the very least, have a dedication to understanding either at the product level, the education ecosystem that you want to be building for. So you can't just say, oh, this is a great idea, I think teachers could use this, without really talking to teachers and making sure it goes beyond being a neat idea. And the other piece is understanding kind of the funding and revenue ecosystem around that product. Who are you selling into? What are their needs? What are their budgets? A big thing I've seen is people that go, oh, I have this amazing product and I'm going to sell it in here, 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 and here, but they haven't looked at the budgets of the department that would theoretically be buying their product. And when you look at that, their budget is $30,000 a year, and realistically, they're not going to spend that much on your product, even if it's revolutionary. So you either have to be an educator or have a real commitment to getting to know educators and then the ecosystem around the funding of your product.
I mean, I think it just completely depends. We, tangentially, we do a lot of work in beauty, and I can't tell you the number of startups I've met with recently that are run by men who are working in beauty, which seems a bit odd, but they're probably going to do pretty well, some of them, because these are guys who are really smart, they know how to run companies, they know how to put together teams, and they understand how to make a product that's going to make money. So I think fundamentally, if you want to be in education technology, if you have an education background, great. But you could be a teacher, and that could leave you with no sense of the procurement cycle whatsoever. So it just sort of depends. I think the more important thing is, do you understand how to put a team together? Do you have the intellectual curiosity to really dig into your field and understand all the confounding variables that can come with operating in that space? So I think it just completely depends.
Yeah, I tend to agree with Sarah to some extent. I mean, my formal experience in education was I just barely graduated from college, so that was my but what I have done, both in the newspaper world and now in education, is made sure that I've kind of been surrounded or put myself, kind of immerse myself in the environments that I hope to provide products and services for, and constantly been ensuring that I am on the right track, that I am talking to people that actually have a budget, that I'm talking to people that will actually utilize the product, and so far that's been a good way to go.
So I think all of you really touched on difficulty in finding a product where there would be an appropriate budget within the school system. So what's the best way to do your due diligence around how do I create a product where a school is going to create a budget for it, and how do I find those schools and that product market fit, particularly as it pertains to ed technology?
I think what you really need to do is, if you're building a product, like what Jordan was saying, is figure out who is going to be the person at the school purchasing that product. And then don't try to go market to 100 schools at once or 1,000 schools at once, but try to get together kind of a target core group of potential buyers in a room, do a demo for them. First of all, see if they like the product and would potentially buy it. If they would, then you can talk about your thoughts on pricing. But I would say definitely don't go into a meeting without doing your homework about what products are out there and what they're selling for, because if you have a background selling to consumers and your product is $50 a student and you go and try to sell into a school with that kind of level of pricing, you're going to look like you didn't do your homework and they're going to not take you as seriously. So, if the average price per student for your product is, $1 to $3, make sure that that metric works for your product and that you're going to make enough of a margin on it.
And one of the things that we found really helpful is the sales teams at the big education companies, so the McGraw-Hills, the Pearsons, the Cengages, those sales teams are really keyed in to where the money is and what types of products, what different department budgets are and what types of products are getting bought. So go on LinkedIn and literally find salespeople from these big companies and say, can I take you out for coffee or can I take you out for lunch? And ask them, show them your product and say, would you know who would buy this, or do you know someone who does that you can put me in touch with? Because they just have all this institutional knowledge and all of these resources that would be very hard for you to get to on your own. And we found that's led us to quite a lot of sales.
Yeah, and I think similar to what Jordan just mentioned, one of the things that we did early on was try to figure out where that money is going in the traditional world. So in the world of tutoring and instruction, SES, which I wouldn't recommend going after, but it was a kind of a traditional kind of venue for money, federal money being spent for tutoring. And what we did is we figured out a way to apply those dollars that are already being spent to an online product. And we were successful, to do that in New Jersey, to become a provider in New Jersey. And we were basically using a more efficient model to deliver instruction to students that already were receiving SES money. So we were finding money that was already there and just applying it to our product.
Very great. So would you say that it's harder to find really business model and monetization strategies as an EdTech company? Are there kind of additional challenges that you face versus a regular technology company, or are there some advantages to selling to the EdTech side?
Well, I think the EdTech world is immense in possibilities and opportunities, but also is challenged with a really difficult sales cycle for the traditional K-12 or higher ed market. But there's a lot of opportunities in education outside of that K-12 or higher ed market, such as private pay. And a lot of the products that we sell, in fact, some of the higher margin products that we sell are directly to the consumer in test prep and math guides and books and in tutoring. So don't forget about that entire segment of the spending population, which is the end consumer.
And there's also that other avenue that you see companies like EverFi taking, where they actually find an outside company to partner with that's going to purchase a service for the school system. And I can tell you that in terms of brands, a lot of brands right now are looking at the education market, just like the publishing companies first started to look at it as a way to monetize around content and as a way to monetize around sort of releasing some of their internal work and thinking. So I think there's going to be more, and I mean that's obviously a very sensitive subject, but there's going to be more ways to think about creative financing, whether it's going direct to consumer, whether it's, you also see big companies like Pearson and Macmillan and these other guys who have distribution systems looking at opening up marketplaces. So how are you going to monetize on somebody else's distribution platform? How are you going to do rev shares? These are all sort of very complicated pricing structures, and I can tell you also, a lot of people struggle with, but it's also important to think about a mixed revenue model. Are you going to gain some of your revenue through the consumer? Are you going to gain some of your revenue through the school system? And then are you going to gain some of your revenue through third-party partnerships? Because once you get into a mixed model revenue, you're amortizing your risk in a way that you're not if you have one specific way of getting your revenue or your pricing.
And I think if you're just kind of a broad technology company, there's lots of potential acquirers at the end of the rainbow. In the EdTech world, there's a limited pool of potential acquirers, and they put out a list every year of the 10 most acquisitive companies in the education space. Take a look. Was that?
I love that.
Acquisitive? Yeah, I think.
I like that. Yeah.
Take a look at who those companies are, and just do some research about the types of companies they acquire, what the revenue run rate of those companies are, and kind of from the get-go, you want to be really realistic. Is this a company that could be acquired by one of the big guys, or is this a company that needs to be fully self-sustaining and it's going to run that way? And you can do kind of a formal analysis of there's a limited pool of people who acquire, and these are the types of companies that they do. So
that raises an interesting point about from acquisition, starting out with getting financing, and those same companies, are those the ones that are doing the initial rounds of investment, and should you even be looking to get investment at all at the beginning, or how important would it be, do you think, to bootstrap and keep yourself nimble at the beginning as opposed to tying yourself to a strategic partner or an acquisition down the road?
Well, I think that a lot of people who are starting businesses now are just really focused on the whole starting a startup. And they're sort of forgetting that before startups were cool and trendy, people were starting businesses. And really great businesses, and I think that because there are so many people out there who are just going along the trend of saying, oh, I need to get VC funding, and that's kind of where the path that they're going down, I think a lot of people need to sort of slow down and think about, are you a VC backable company? And I have two companies. One, I bootstrapped and raised a small friends family round, and it's profitable, revenue generating. I've had it for 9 years. And the other company that I just started, we raised VC funding because they have totally separate goals. And when you're starting a business, if you have a business that maybe could generate $2 million a year in revenue, or potentially $10 million, that's not really the type of company that's going to be interesting for a VC or a potential acquisition by a big company like Pearson. Whereas if your company could potentially be earning $50 to $100 million in revenue, that's VC backable. That's something where you could see a potential exit. And I think that too many people are going down this road of like, oh, I need to do a startup, I need to raise VC funding, when maybe you're just building a really awesome small business that could turn into a $10 million company one day. And I think that too many people aren't thinking about that right now.
I mean, I think there's lots of sources of capital, and you have to be the right company at the right time for each source. So like our company, we raised angel financing, and then we raised 6-figure grants from the Gates Foundation when it was the right time to do that. And then we did some 7-figure strategic partnerships with big education companies where they essentially did prepaid distribution deals with us, where they gave us money up front to act as a distributor for some of our products. And then if they didn't sell, we gave them money back, but if they did sell, that just went towards their percentage. And then we ultimately raised 7 figures from McGraw-Hill Education Ventures as a strategic investor, which has its pros and cons as well. Like we, as a McGraw-Hill investment, we have access to this very big sales force and all this institutional knowledge, but it also to some extent limits other big ed companies that we can partner with. So I think depending on where you are, it's a really great point. Not every company should or should want to raise VC money because a VC is going to want a 10x return of a certain quantity. We once had a meeting with a VC where we did a pitch and they said, all right, we buy that this could be a $300 million company, but I only invest in billion-dollar companies and you have 10 minutes left. So you have 10 minutes to bridge a gap of $700 million. Go. But like that's the
How'd you do?
I couldn't even but to some extent that's the mentality. Like you might find that angels will help you build a really sustainable, important business that's not going to be a billion-dollar company, but is going to still make lots of money and help lots of people.
And it seems like EdTech in general is a very collaborative group of folks. Everyone's a common goal of the greater good. So with that being said, it seems like there's a lot of opportunity to collaborate with other EdTech companies. Jess, I know you and Ryan have worked together. What would you recommend to help find a good complementary product company team to marry services with distribution or content, things like that?
Well, I think that for partnerships, it's really important to understand what you do well. And if you have a vision of, we're here and we want to add on this service and this and this, at some point it might make sense not to utilize all of your resources in developing those additional features that would enhance your core product. Sometimes it will, but for us, with The Edge, we've actually done a couple of partnerships now. So with The Edge, we created a really robust online SAT/ACT prep course that has 1,500 videos on it, skills analysis, online proctoring, and a lot of the students on the platform wanted to upgrade to have a one-on-one synchronous learning experience. And that was something where we would have to output a lot of resources to build an online classroom and to train tutors how to teach in that online environment. And Ryan and I met, and he's already doing that. And so what we did is we partnered, and his tutors are being trained with our curriculum. So if a student wants to upgrade from just that core online course, they can do what we call Edge Prep Live, and it's going fantastically well there.
Yeah, and I think one of the advantages too to a partnership like that, in addition to combining our resources, is when we go out on sales calls, and it really adds a lot of firepower. One of the challenges of being an EdTech startup is that I'm the chief technology officer, the chief marketing officer. You gotta empty the trash, everything else in between, and so it's a challenge. And so when you do have an opportunity to go into one of the larger, either school districts or public company that runs large school districts without naming names, and you have that opportunity to make a sales call. If you go in by yourself, it's great, but if you can go in there with someone that has the exact same level of passion and experience and energy that you also bring to the table, that just doubled your sales opportunities. And Jess and I did 3 sales calls probably in the last 4 or 5 months, and we're 3 for 3, which is pretty good average considering I was 0 for 10 going into that. So, so it does add a lot of firepower. It has to be the right combination of products, obviously, and also the right combination of personalities. I think founders sometimes can be difficult people to work with one another. So it has to be a good match kind of all around.
I also think that in terms of partnerships, the other thing that startups should really consider is instead of trying to hire somebody to start selling for you, which is going to be a big outlay of resources. Another area where partnerships are great is partnering to get your product into schools. And another partnership that we did with Edge was with Dedication, which is one of the sponsors here today. And we integrated our test prep course with their dashboard gradebook platform. And it's kind of a feature add-on that schools can buy, but it enhances that product, and having the integration there certainly enhances what we're doing, and that has been a really great way to present and meet different principals and school districts, because they already have a massive startups rather than trying to just get a head start and just, you know, meet people from the get-go or hire someone from McGraw-Hill or Pearson. You know, finding a partner who is a little bit farther along than you is a really great thing to consider.
I think the other thing too is the education tech community is actually amazing, and you know it's really close knit. I think the thing to think about is potentially partnering with startups or companies that are slightly outside of that space or touching that space, because that becomes an even more interesting value proposition, and it also exposes you to technologies or consumer bases or additional buyer pain points that would allow you to slip your service under the door. And that could be something like communications companies, startups, technologies, entertainment companies, startups, technologies, people who are adjoining spaces. And that's something, I mean, people always think, well, I'm EdTech, I have to go with EdTech. But I think there's a lot of room in the market to be a little bit more out of the box and also look at companies that can add value in sort of other industry ways.
Great. So when you're selling your product, what do you guys think are the best practices to really find the decision makers? Because when you're selling a general technology product, you know if you're a marketing software to look for the CMOs, and if you're financial services, you know to look for the CFOs. But for EdTech, it could be principals, superintendents. How do you get to those decision makers, since they're so varied, and in each district they can have different decision making structures and things like that?
I guess I'm just a fan of being really blunt and asking people outright, hey, here's my product, here's what I'm trying to sell. Do you know someone within your organization who would be the proper title here for me to talk to? And I'll also be pretty blunt about what's your sales cycle, when do you buy products, what's your budget, here's our pricing, do you think you can afford this? Because you can just waste a lot of time being really nice and kind of edging around the corners, and you'll talk to someone and you'll waste 2-3 months to find actually you're not buying for another 6 months, or this product is just way too expensive for your budget. And people might not be out front with that information. So knowing like what's key to making a sale and politely just asking all of those things up front. It's rare that someone's turned off by that. If anything, you're conserving their time as well.
So are there specific marketing challenges to even get in front of those people, get those introductions? Is there good channels through the bigger McGraws and Pearsons to partner so they can kind of hook you into the right folks, since they've already done a lot of the legwork there?
I mean, for us, that was one of the reasons we took strategic investment from McGraw-Hill, because it explicitly gave us access to their sales force. So we have a lot of distribution partnerships. They sell a lot of our products. We just get a lot of knowledge from them, and that was key to us as we wanted to kind of expand more nationally. But I'm also horrible with LinkedIn in that I overuse it. I'm really shameless about just going on LinkedIn, finding people, and then harassing them until they respond. And the kind of amazing thing is, you think like, oh my God, I've sent this person 20 emails, like they must hate me. But by the time they respond, they often thank you for being so persistent. So I've just learned to, even if they will hate you, convince yourself that they're gonna love you for it. And just be really annoying, and more times than not, they'll take your meeting.
And I'd say too, like getting to the right person is great and very important, but we work with a bunch of companies that sell through like the Pearson and the McGraws, and there's often a quality assurance problem. So you have somebody out there, you have a very varied sales force, some of which are gonna be great, some of which are gonna be horrific. And they're out there and they're trying to articulate your value proposition in addition to like 5 others. So knowing that they're saying the right thing and that they have the right materials to really clearly and consistently communicate that message. And then once somebody hears that message, driving them to a place that they're once again going to be very clear about, if I'm a principal, if I'm a school district, if I'm a parent, how they engage with your product. That to me is almost the harder piece of it, because they go out, they say something that like kind of makes sense but kind of doesn't, and then they send it up to your website, which you aren't totally happy with, and you get to the homepage and sometimes isn't even clear what the product is, and then people are clicking around and then they're lost, and then their phone rings and then it's over. So
and tying right into your last point there too, don't be afraid to pick up the phone. I mean, I find so many times I get so frustrated. I'm like, where is this person's email address? Why can't I find them? And right in front of me the whole time is their telephone number. And I realize, and a lot of times it's so much more effective anyways, is to just pick up the telephone, and a lot of times they're shocked because they're so used to getting Jordan's LinkedIn, blast. So, and a lot of times that phone conversation will save you 15 emails and a bunch of kind of misguided communication. And plus, unless you've received at least one restraining order, you're not a good salesperson.
Yeah, I mean, I think just really quickly, because I thought both of you made really important points. One being that on a collateral point of view, like having in advance before you start harassing people, 10 pieces of collateral so that anything they could ask for, you've really anticipated it and you can give them professional looking materials, really speeds up the process because you need someone to not only be sold, but to then act as your advocate within their organization, and you need to give them the tools to do that. And the other thing with the phone is, like, it's against every instinct I have to just call someone. Like, it just feels like unless we have something scheduled, it's like a violation. But I've had deals that literally, like, I would have lost if I had just picked up the phone and called people. And also kind of, for whatever reason, like, the higher level they were, the more uncomfortable I feel about calling them. But that's exactly the call that's gonna get your deal done. So you have to be, like, unafraid to, yeah.
I also think that in terms of marketing, sometimes your best advocate is the person who's going to be using the product. So if you're building something for a guidance counselor, you should probably be talking to guidance counselors and build something for them that is solving one of their major problems. And so with Admittedly, like, we've been talking to tons of guidance counselors about what do you like, what don't you have access to, how can we help you? And if you build a product that they actually want, they're going to be the ones who tell their principal or tell the buyer, like, we need this product, this is awesome. And the other thing that we've found is that we also have a consumer-facing product as well, so students can actually come to our website and buy the course, and they will often say to their, teachers or principals, like, why doesn't our school have this? My friends at the other school, they get it for free from their school. And when the students and the parents, like, if you have a really annoying parent, it can be really, a huge benefit to you for them to go up and say, like, why does this school have this and we don't? And they can be kind of your external sales force as well.
Great. Yeah, and you mentioned product testing and getting it into the right hands. I mean, how important is it, with as a unique challenge to EdTech to really get the product tested by the right people in the right hands? I mean, how much of a difference does that make?
I think it makes a huge difference. When I first built the online test prep course, it was based on curriculum that I'd been teaching for 10 years that I wrote back in 2005. And obviously upgraded it each year as there were certain nuances to the SAT and the ACT. But then when I first had the beta product and showed it to my students, they were like, well, where do I go next? And I'm like, oh, well, obviously, like, you're going to go right here because that makes sense. And in my head, it makes sense because I created the product. But, those first 50 users taught me so much about how to build a product that is usable by someone who didn't create it. And that was something that really directed the whole user interface of the product and was really important to us.
I think it's also hard in EdTech because people are rightfully so a little bit worried about how they define sort of like the burden of proof. Because talking about education outcomes and your ability to affect them is a bold statement and one I think and I wish more people would make, but one that can often come under attack from a lot of areas. And that's why I think one of the best sort of resources / capacities you could build around your company when it comes to product testing, which is now, like data analytics, but back in the day and for like the last, 30 decades has just been performance measurement management, is really understanding how to create, a set of metrics around your product, how to put a system in place to collect data on those metrics, and how to continually use that information to manage your product and yourselves, and basically just test, refine, and when the time is right, and a lot of people forget to do this, report. If you're doing something good, whether it's on the customer satisfaction side or whether it's on the outcome side, tell somebody. Because that's really effective in terms of getting users and getting traction in media and the market.
And you mentioned it's really important to gather these metrics. Now I'd imagine, that's probably your biggest sales these metrics, but it's I would imagine very unique to each of these different districts that value these metrics differently. So how does that kind of change the sales cycle, considering that you're selling a different value proposition to each school, not knowing kind of where how they value each different metric that we gather.
I mean, for me, like the best sales trick ever is to let people tell you their problem and then to contextualize your solution within their problem. So that's part of it, is sort of looking for having that wide array of 30 answers, and then when they tell you their problem, being able to surface metrics and answer it. But I think there's some generally accepted ones, in the same way that, you know, if you look in advertising, you have impressions, time watched, et cetera, you look at education and there's specific types of outcomes that we look for around to the student platforms, around teacher platforms, around content, et cetera. So just really having a solid understanding of what metrics apply to what product is also really helpful.
Great. So as you grow and scale as a company and you look towards potentially an exit or an acquisition, something like that, or a strategic partnership, it seems like there's very few key players there. So what would you recommend will be the best way to position yourself to be an attractive company for these big players to partner with or potentially buy you guys outright?
I mean, my perspective of building a company is to build a company for long-term value. And if you just concentrate on building a company for long-term value, then those opportunities surface. If you're constantly focused on trying to build a company for acquisition, I think that you end up building a shallow company that probably won't be as attractive to a larger acquirer.
So I'll take a kind of, I don't fully believe this, but on the other side of the spectrum, particularly if you've taken VC money, you're either building a company that just has massive revenues, or you're going to build a company that's positioning itself for an exit at some point in time, particularly within the EdTech space where there's a limited pool of acquirers. A lot of these acquirers move very, very, very slowly because they're busy, and they also don't necessarily have a department dedicated to making acquisitions. Like I think one thing that's almost criminal is there's great EdTech companies that have been funded at the $1 to $2 million level that are building really amazing products, and sometimes they don't achieve perfect product market fit, and there's not really big companies that are there to acquire them and snap them up. And sometimes they just disappear, and there's all this amazing technology and talent that's kind of fading away. The big companies, I wish that they paid attention to that stuff, but they don't always. So I'd say identify who your potential acquirers could be, and very, very early on, make a contact at each of those companies. Give yourself 6 months just to get in the door and get in front of them, because it's hard, and then give regular updates once every 3 months. Just put it on your calendar to send them a note, because if the time ever comes when you do need an acquisition, you want the person on the other end to feel like, I've been tracking this company for a long time, I'm really impressed with it, this is a good buy. If you surprise someone all at once and for whatever reason you need an exit, and say like, hey, here's all this info, please, 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 they're just not nimble enough. I wish they were.
Yeah, and I would say also, really try to anticipate the market. So why does a company even acquire you in the first place? They acquire you because they don't want to build it themselves, or because you're too strong of a competitor to something they're building internally. So you have to look at what this company is doing, like Pearson. Where is Pearson now? Where are they going to be in 6 months? What are the products that they're building internally? What do they need to build in order to meet the market? Where do you fit into all of that? Are you redundancy? Okay, if you're redundant to them, are you stronger than what they have internally? It's very hard for large companies to build things internally because of budget. I mean, this, you'll deal with vice presidents who don't even have a budget in these big companies. Or because there's too many politics or there's too many departments. So if you can be more nimble, if you can push their product further and add value to something else that they have internally, or if you can anticipate what you think they're going to build it better, faster, and then position yourself for them to buy it. I mean, that's fundamentally, I think, why acquisitions happen.
And also, if you can find a department where it's in their self-interest, where like, if the acquisition fails, it's the M&A guy's fault. But if the acquisition works, you've just given some VP additional resources to increase his revenue for this year, which is going to make him look like a rock star. He'll push the deal for you, or she'll push the deal for you. So yeah, can you find not only the M&A guy, but an internal advocate where you're going to make them look really good?
Corporate espionage.
Yeah, exactly. Harassment and espionage.
Okay, I think Yep. Okay. So do we have questions?
Okay, I'm a senior VP and a publisher, so I'm just going to come up and announce everything. I'm going to give you guys just from my perspective, because I've been in this business for almost 30 years, so I'm going to give you some perspective on some of the things I heard. Some of the things which were interesting, and some of which I appreciate, but some other perspective, just from someone who's been in the higher ed space. We're watching some very large companies right now that people are counting on for exit strategies being roiled by the markets. All right, sales are way down. I don't know if you guys are aware, but we're looking at companies that are suffering double-digit sales losses year over year, the last 3 years in a row. Okay, so these companies are either going to retrench and rethink how they do business and how they move forward, or die. Right? I mean, it is. I've been in this business a long time. I kind of think about the encyclopedia mechanic model. It's happening. Abroad, it's happening here. Everybody's got to get smarter and better. So, I think the key for any startup that wants to be acquired is to make sure you figure out how you're going to add value to whatever problems that they're facing. I think that's the most important thing to think about, and help solve those problems while also meeting market need. That's the first thing. The second thing I will say is, when I talk with tech companies, when I need to solve problems that I have around some of the things that we build, it always helps when that partner can bring a potential deal to the table as well. Okay, because it's through some combination of your services and my services, we can create a solution set that results in a sale. That typically motivates me to want to work with that partner to make something happen, and that eventually can lead to an acquisition. Or I can tell you, my only feeling on acquisition right now is I can tell you that it's got to be very compelling. I think we sit here on watching all these startups, and we're wondering what is the next big thing going to be. And it's not really always obvious. And unless you buy everybody, I don't know. I don't know what your success rate is going to be. So just my perspective, and I thought I'd share that. Really good panel. Really good perspective.
Great insight. Thank you for that. And as a startup, actually, what you're saying in terms of partnership is more appealing to me than acquisition. So my question is, how long do those cycles typically take? Because the startups move very fast and corporations don't. So what is that time frame that if I want to create something like that, I have to factor in?
So one of the partnerships that we did with took about, from the time I met the person at the organization to the time where the deal was signed, it was about 9 months. So it's, you meet the person, you set up your initial meeting, then you want a follow-on meeting, and then after that, they have to talk internally to their team, and then at that point, maybe do a demo to some of the people who are buying to make sure that they can sell your product. So I would definitely say like 6 to 12 months.
It's almost always like when you go into the meeting, you have a feeling in your gut, like this could get signed in 3 months, at 6 months.
Well, I will say though, we just did a deal in 2 weeks. So, but the way we did that deal was there was a sale on the table.
Yeah.
So the incentive was, let's get the deal done because we're going to hit this sales meeting as a unified front. And in order to do that, we've got to have a story, we've got to have materials, so we can't mess around. So I also like to think about what's the leverage. So if you have, go at it with some good leverage.
So we sell products into schools and districts and states, and then frequently they're very conservative buyers, and frequently they'll want to see something in there that gives them assurance that we're going to have the sticking power to deliver our service consistently for several years. They want to see, in some cases, audited financial statements. They want to have, they want to see references from other districts or states of their size that we've delivered services to consistently. And I always wonder, if you're a young startup, how do you get past that hurdle of convincing these conservative buyers that you're going to be around in 2 years? They're not taking a really big risk. Sorry.
Well, that's why I think that as a young startup, it's sometimes easier to partner with a bigger organization because that organization has probably been around for way longer and has really established connections with those districts or principals or schools. And when you have someone saying to like, okay, well, I'm going to take a bet on it. And I think that there are a lot of EdTech companies that have sold into districts and then they have failed, and that is really scary for a principal or an educator, because if they start implementing that into their entire curriculum and then all of a sudden a year later the company is not in existence, that's really frustrating. So yeah, I would say that if you have an advocate there, instead of putting your resources towards a salesperson, a sales team, have a bigger company kind of back you and say like, yes, I'm behind this organization. It's really confidence boosting.
I also used to work in procurement on the ed side, and as much as it seems like it's a very official, structured process, it's not. And there's a lot of emotion in there, and there's a lot of places where you can influence people to a degree. And I think I don't know the context of the deal, but if there's any way to, instead of trying to get someone to eat the whole meal, to take a bite, and really kind of lure them in almost like a courtship, and get them to try the product, to know you, to trust you, because that's a huge aspect of it. Never discount human emotion and knowing that you can trust someone and getting someone really fully invested that way versus being like, you gotta have the whole thing now and I'm gonna be here. It's like, whoa.
And part of it is like they're looking for an external signifier of quality or stability. So you might not be able to give them the one that they're asking for, but try to figure out what other external signifiers can you get. Like in a lot of startups, it's that early startup press. If you can get yourself covered by New York Times or by TechCrunch, you can point to this article, which isn't what they're looking for, but it's something. And then you kind of like consciously build up signifiers where when you don't have longevity in a track record, you have these until you have that, and hopefully that bridges the gap.
So how important is it, along with his point, finding folks like our keynote speaker, Eric, who is just clearly can shepherd an entire philosophy change in a school district. How do you find those people? How do you create them? How do you prop them up?
Well, I think it's complicated. This is sort of a side answer. I can tell you that I don't know if you're familiar with the Entertainment Foundation, but they did like Stand Up to Cancer, etc. They're about to get behind education and put a lot of resources towards sort of pushing education change with not driving product, not driving program, but just shifting the conversation. So I think, that larger conversation and allying with people like that can be really effective and interesting.
I had a question for Jordan. You had talked about making a phone call was infinitely important. Is it more important to open up the door, or is it more important to close the sale?
Yeah, it's hard. Like you need the door open to get in there and propose your sale. So the nice thing is you can kind of open up the door. If you say, here are the 10 companies that I want to get into, I'm gonna go on LinkedIn and I'm gonna send 20 messages per company, and if I get a X% response rate, I'll eventually get someone at every one of these companies. And then you have your rough open door. I think at the end of the day, you want to get on these people's radar and you want to get their attention, but you also want at some point in time for them to write you a check because of a partnership or because of a distribution deal or something like that. And when it comes to that, at the end of the day, like sales is human interaction. Someone's doing it for you because they like your product, but also because they like you and they have a relationship with you and they trust you. So you need to make sure that the person that you've opened the door with will go to bat for you in some way. And that might mean going out for drinks with them, and it might mean emailing them, and it might mean just calling them if they're ignoring you and be like, hey. Because also, the thing that makes you annoying is also the thing that makes you a go-getter. And at the end of the day, someone wants to work with someone who's like a hustler and who's gonna go for it. So yeah, annoy them until their annoyance turns into like, oh, this person's a hustler, aren't they? And then you can make them money, and that's what they care about.
And it also seems like you can easily forget your EdTech startup, so you're immersed in technology all day long, and you're trying to reach a group of people that are inherently low-tech.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So they don't get email, or they may not want to have email, or spend half their day on email. Whereas as an EdTech or any technology company, you spend all day on email. So
yeah, I'm checking my phone nonstop. I can't imagine that someone wouldn't have the exact same patterns, but they don't.
Any other questions? Okay, great. I guess everyone's hungry, so.
Yeah, let's here's where